Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in.
Mr. Hunter Jackson, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for having this conversation with me.
Absolutely. So you and I bumped into each other at the KM&I conference in New York, and I got a great laugh over a few metaphors you used in your conversation about AI and how it was hallucinating like a millennial at Burning Man. And I had to go introduce myself after that, and we had a great convo, and I saw some of the stuff that you guys are doing at McDermott. And you know, it's kind of hard to find people who are actually doing AI instead of just talking about doing AI. So I thought this would be a great conversation. And but before we jump down that rabbit hole, why don't you introduce yourself? You've got a super interesting background. You've been at a ton of AM law firms, and tell us a little bit about your experience.
Sure. So I got out of law school in 1999, which is a depressing statement every time I make it, and was a practicing lawyer for the first 10 plus years of my career. So I started my career as a real estate lawyer at Gibson Dunn. One of the interesting things that I did there was when Mark Cuban became a billionaire and decided to buy the Dallas Mavericks, I was about a second-year lawyer, and so I actually helped acquire the Dallas Mavericks and build the American Airlines Center here in town. I've always joked, if you're going to buy a basketball, who better to hire than a 5'6" guy in a law school with no hand-eye coordination to really facilitate. That screams NBA lawyer. When I did that, I moved to Jones Day for 4 years and was a real estate lawyer there, and then made a move to Paul Hastings. And so the first portion of my career was all at the commercial real estate space, buying and selling, lending, borrowing, joint venture work, and then made a move into legal knowledge management in 2012.
And how, I would imagine, transactional attorneys, especially, those involved with big transactions like the Dallas Mavericks, it's very prestigious. I imagine the earning potential would be, phenomenal in doing that sort of work. How did you fall into KM from where you were?
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about having been around as long as I have is I've seen several business cycles, including the great financial recession of 08-09, and that was a real estate-driven recession with the people who were doing some of the work that I was doing back in the day. And so when that work dried up, really, especially with somebody the level of seniority that I had, there just wasn't as much opportunity. They were not making any partners or really any opportunities at that point. Two of the big five investment banks had gone out of business. And so Paul Hastings said, we love what you do, but there's not a lot going on. But the firm had a need to try and create some infrastructure around knowledge solutions. And they came to me and said, we do all these deals, and we've been in front of these lenders and been in front of these borrowers, but to find that work product is a perpetual needle in a haystack search. I know we've written it before. I know we've said it before. I know we've done it before. I know we've been in front of this person, but the ability to find that was a disaster. And so there was not really any vision for how to go about it other than there has to be a better way. And that's how I got involved in legal knowledge management, specifically at Paul Hastings, and trying to build out the infrastructure there, and then working my way up the org chart at a couple of other organizations.
So has your KM work focused more in the areas of practice from which you've came, which obviously on the M&A, in the M&A space, or has it been more broad?
So I will say, I started out supporting the Wall Street Group, Paul Hastings. I made a move to Stidley in 2015 and was in charge of their all of their knowledge management platforms for their various transactional practices. And then made a move to McDermott beginning of 21, mandated building a knowledge management infrastructure for this organization. because I had a transactional background, the lowest hanging fruit and the things that I knew how to do best were in that transactional space. So that was the easiest, those are the easiest platforms to get off the ground. We are moving into developing resources for our litigators and engage in active projects right now. But because of my background, those are the things I concentrate on first, get some points on the board, some wins. People see the way it works. And then other groups, they see that like, wait, why do we have something for litigation? Well, because we've never had a conversation. And so because of my background, that has kind of grounded some of the projects I've done and given me the space to move on to other groups that we're working on now who will be in 2024.
Makes sense. And then, so what is your role today at McDermott?
I am the Chief Knowledge Officer of the firm. Got here in 2021 as a Senior Director of Knowledge Management, was promoted about a year and a half after I got here. Have a department now, a team of 5 people, adding additional headcount next year. And our focus for the past couple of years really been on finance, M&A private equity, and our health practices, and expanding next year really into our litigation and regulatory practices because we're getting some additional help.
Gotcha. Well, and like I mentioned at the start of the call, it's clear that you guys are actually doing some real work in AI. And, I think everybody has a little bit of AI fatigue because everybody who, it just has overtaken the headlines. And I'm noticing that there's sometimes a little bit of a thin veneer once you poke a little bit deeper as far as what actual true value add work is being conducted. And you guys are an exception to that. You have multiple award-winning platforms, and I wanted to talk about a few of those today. Form Finder was one that caught my attention. I see that you guys have won, you won an award at Legal Week, and I wanted to, first of all, tell me about that process and what the award was all about. And then maybe we can dive into understanding some of the use cases that Form Finder accommodates.
It's funny you talk about AI and AI fatigue. The reality is that every law firm in this country licenses, we all do, every one of us. We license e-discovery software, which has been around for years. We license diligence software like curated for diligence purposes. Every law firm licensing some variation of the same thing. And so to me, it's not a question of whether a law firm is investing in AI. It's what are you doing with that AI? And so when I got to McDermott, as I said, my background was in transactional. So I had never seen e-discovery software. I never had any reason to see e-discovery software. And so as I was taking a tour of the technology that we licensed in the organization, trying to understand what different things did, and somebody talked about how e-discovery software works and pattern match, and you tag this document as Mark Zuckerberg talked to his lawyer, and that's a privileged communication. And then the relativity said, there's 75 other examples that are like that. And when I heard that, I thought, well, I've never been a litigator, but as a corporate lawyer, I can see a use case. So if you're a transactional lawyer, the first question you have when you get an agreement from opposing counsel is, have we ever done this before? And when I say done it, I mean, have we negotiated this specific form of agreement? If I'm borrowing money from JP Morgan to buy a home, have we done a hotel loan where JP Morgan was a lender? Because if the answer is yes, then I know where the bodies are buried. I know the concessions that JP Morgan is willing to make on that. I know what requirements they have. I know how to finesse the reps and warranties to provide more protection for a borrower. But the challenge is, that document is not particularly easy. If you go to our document management system and you search loan agreement and JP Morgan, you get like 500 or 600 hits because we've done it in versus JP Morgan. But to find that exact agreement, the JP Morgan for using this template on this type of deal, that there was not a real way to do that. And so when I heard about how e-discovery technology and that it was creating a similarity in relative to a base document, I thought, there's a potential platform and service that we could create for transactional lawyers that will be very meaningful. And that's how that initiative got started.
Interesting. So the inputs, is this an LLM based tool?
No, it's not. So
Okay.
what we do is we use relativity e-discovery. And so what we did, we have a phenomenal e-discovery team here at the firm and a really strong bench in terms of how to leverage that technology. And so what we did is we said our use case, because we have a pretty big M&A department of about 200 plus lawyers. What we did is we said, I want to export every purchase agreement that we've done in the past 15 years out of our document management system and put that data set into relativity. And so that's what we did. We exported 15 years of purchase agreements into relativity. And then what we did is created a branded experience that we called Form Finder. Form Finder is relativity. That's all it is. We branded it. It's a very specific type of search you do in relativity, which we've spent some time experimenting with. But the way it works at our firm is if you're an M&A lawyer and you get a purchase agreement from opposing counsel, or you're a lending lawyer and you get a credit agreement from opposing counsel, you send that to Form Finder. Our team takes it, analyzes it, runs that through relativity, says, what is this agreement relative to all of the agreements that we've done that are in that data set, and then looks at whether there's a similarity. And to the extent that there's a hit, we send a link of that 1, 2, 3, however many documents to the requesting attorney. So all of the screens are preserved. We don't just send a random document to somebody. So if you, Ted, are screened from BDO matters, you're not going to get any. You click on that, and you're not going to get any. So we're very cognizant of architecting a system that is via the general counsel protocol. But we send a link to that final link, and then we also send context links. So this credit agreement was a borrower deal from 2 years ago. The partner was whomever. And we also say, you should get in touch with that partner to use this, to have context, to understand what the deal was. Because on so many of these, if we're responding to, let's say we're buying a company and it's an auction situation, well, we're bidding against a bunch of other people. The guidance you get from your client, a lot of times you're getting a great deal. You don't mark that up more than is absolutely necessary. It's important context to understand if you're going to repurpose somebody's markup and the guidance from the client was only pick the essential things. Well, that's a good thing to know if you're going to repurpose that work product, because it means they really only got the most important stuff. There may be an additional pass I want to do through this to really to really spot all the issues. So it's having that context, being cognizant of our restrictions. That's how we built the platform.
Interesting. And you said loading 15 years of documents into relativity. Was that an automated or a manual process?
It's a manual process. We have a superstar document management system team here who continues to take my phone calls for some reason. But it was a massive export that we did at the beginning, and then there's an automated process where once a month they created this infrastructure. Once a month, an additional suite comes out of our document management system into relativity, so that the platform grows as we continue to close more deals, and so forth. There are so many lessons that I learned. I don't think that in retrospect, if I had to do over again, that I would do 15 years. And in fact, as we've expanded it to other groups and platforms, we've really only gone back 5 or 6 years. Because, if you're trying to find a credit agreement and your hit is from 2003, 2004, well, lots happened since then. And so even if that was a hit, I don't know that it's the most meaningful hit. And so we've actually found in terms of the results that we've gotten, it's always more the past 4, 5, 6 years. So that export was probably way over-inclusive. And by virtue of it being over-inclusive, it took a lot more time for our document management system to do. It took a couple of months for them to script to do the export and everything. And so we learned that lesson, have pivoted as we've done additional expansions. But right now we're having conversations with 2 different groups in Germany because they've heard about this and said, we think there's actually a great use case. We have a license for relativity in Europe so that for GDPR purposes, it all stays over there. But what we found is the original use case, which was M&A private equity, we found that we have about a 50% match rate if it's an AmLaw 100 firm. For our finance practice, we have more like an 80% match rate for an AmLaw 100 firm. And the reason for that is because there just aren't as many banks, there aren't as many lenders, there aren't as many law firms that specialize in that. So there's a JP Morgan, Wells, they're just a discrete number of players. In a corporate setting, Blackstone has a form, and TPG has a form, Apollo has a form. They all have different variations, and by virtue of all the different law firms and all the different companies, you just have exponentially more templates in that setting. So we've had much more success on our finance version of this than we had on the traditional M&A version. And what we're hearing from our non-U.S. offices is that there may be even a greater impact over there, similar to our credit agreements, because it's a more narrow universe of people who do this work and a more narrow universe of forms. And so it's exciting because I think this scales and that is meaningful for our U.S. lawyers, but it's also getting some buzz and attention overseas.
I've heard the metaphor, I'm sure you have as well, is, data is the new oil, right? And that the value of the data is really, people are being like broken into camps of haves and have-nots. And the firms like McDermott with, 1,300 attorneys-ish, they're at an advantage. If I'm a potential client and I'm looking at law firm partners and I want to get advantages, because you're almost playing inside baseball really at that point, right? It's you've got data that maybe a smaller firm that doesn't have that same depth or that seems to be it would be a huge advantage for the bigger firms like McDermott.
Yeah. So, as a tech tonight, I do well with oil and utilities, but I've heard this data is the new oil. I also read another commentator, I'm going to steal with mine, but he said, if data is the new oil, data insight that you gain from that data is the new petroleum, because oil is, you can't do anything. Petroleum is a refined product. It allows you to create chemicals and all different kinds. And so, the legality is that this organization, McDermott, just like any major law, they are sitting on vast quantities of data. But the ability, the difference between a very successful company and a multi-billion-dollar company is not whether you're sitting on that data, what you do with it. Can you access it? Can you focus it? And ultimately, can you monetize it? Because that is what we are in the business of doing, is taking historic work product or expertise and repurposing it into something meaningful for a new litigation matter, a new transactional matter. And so what we've been trying to do is to recognize that we do have an advantage by being 1,200 lawyers scattered across the globe, and the amount of information that we have on our document management system is robust, and using technology and AI platforms to get at that, to allow us to access it, to allow us to search it, to allow us to repurpose it, and to allow us to monetize it. That's the business that we're in. And as the technology improves, staying ahead of that curve is going to be imperative for any organization like ours to succeed.
Yeah. You can have the sharpest people on your staff, you can have the best tools, but if you don't have that data, your effectiveness really there are limits. So yeah, that seems like it would be a huge advantage, and one that I would be actively trying to differentiate myself if I were on your BD team, as I'm sure they are. So you talked a little bit about the tech stack. So it's relativity. Are there any other platforms or technologies that you had to kind of bring together to make FormFinder work?
So it's a few things. it was an export for our document management system, the data set from iManage, which is what you were talking about, sort of having a vast repository of data. So that data set from iManage, Relativity is the platform that allows us to do the analysis, and that's really it. You have people who understand relativity, who know how to do the searches, and it's a little bit of an art and science, because what we do is we have a set of results, and then we have some people look at those results, compare it to the form that we got in, and really see what a match it is. Because if it's nothing but red ink, if you redline, that historic match versus this, and the only thing that overlaps is a oath, it doesn't really help you in terms of a markup. And so it's a little bit of the technology and a little bit of human curation of like, is this really relevant for people? And so that's our process. Requesting attorney sends that. Our e-discovery team looks at it. We have another group take a pass from the black line of the historic match to the current version. And then we send links to those relevant hits, again, so that they're subject to all those protocols and people only have access to what they're supposed to. So we have about a 1 business day turnaround time on this offering. But it's been, as I said, it's been tremendously successful. We rolled it out and got an immediate goal as to expand it to finance. And then, as I said, our non-U.S. offices have heard about this offering and are looking at it for their groups. And so it's like I said, it's our document management system with which everybody licenses. And it's Relativity, which most law. But it's taking our technology stack. I know we license Relativity for e-discovery, but have you thought about doing something different? And I think that's what we do in this organization that's meaningful is to, I know we license this platform for this use. Have you ever thought this? And it's wonderful because I work in an organization that really gives me the space to experiment fast and that allows for creativity and for efficiencies, and that's been tremendously valuable as we built out some of the platforms that we built.
So I think I'm not sure if it's Form Finder. It could be the next tool that we're going to talk about, which is the Deal Hub. But it is Form Finder, when somebody opens a matter, automatically an email is generated. You're kind of meeting people where they are. Is that, we had talked about that in our previous call.
That is not Form Finder, simply because,
Okay.
and let me say this, we actually have experimented with that. It's a little bit difficult to disentangle whether somebody has a need based off of an alert from our document system for Form Finder. And this is probably a little bit too in the weed, but we experimented with kind of a frictionless approach for Form Finder. And what we found is Form Finder is still one where a request should come in because I don't have an ability to, a lot of times, to know whether this was a work product that was generated in-house or whether it was a work product generated from somebody else. And so we actually experimented with trying to set up alerts and push data. And what we found is it's actually better. We were sending people things that they didn't need. And so rather than try overly proactive, we clawed that back relative to this offering. So the workflow is still a lawyer gets an agreement from opposing counsel. And sometimes they've been opposite that person. They've already done a particular deal. This is truly a case of first impression. I've never done this deal. I've never been opposite this firm. I've never seen this paper before. Hey, let me know whether somebody else in the system has. And when we created it, I really thought it was going to be something that, took a 10-hour markup down to a 6-hour. And what we found is that it's not so much time saving as it is a profound quality improvement, because we're all very smart lawyers, but you going through and reading an agreement and issue spotting is important. And it's important to do through the context of the deal you have. But if you also have the backstop of somebody else having looked at that agreement and them preparing comments to it and the issues they spot, it's not just your mark and your years of experience. You're also being able to piggyback off of head of finances experience, the head of, or, the senior corporate lawyer. And so what we're doing is we're creating a much better product with that first round markup than we otherwise would have, because we're not showing on our ability to issue spot, but the collective wisdom of anybody who's ever touched that agreement.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, and generating unwanted or unneeded emails and clogging inboxes makes a lot of sense as well.
Yes.
What about so M&A PE Deal Hub? So I think you guys are up for an award with the Financial Times. Is that right?
We are. So yes, we are up for an award from the Financial Times in December. We're shortlisted for this platform, and this what our Deal Hub was a downstream product that we created, having worked from the Form Finder data set. So again, as I said earlier, the perpetual needle in a haystack. I know we've done it. I know we've written it. I know we've said it, but God, how do I find that? What we did is we recognized that there is some structure to how people think of information. And so if you're a corporate lawyer, an M&A private equity lawyer, the big thing you're looking for, it is an agreement. But so I talked about the pattern match. If we were done this specific agreement, but beyond that, but that's reacting. I am reacting to this draft from Sidley on this agreement. A lot of times you're trying to draft something, and so Form Finder doesn't move the needle there. Form Finder is, have I done this deal before? But if you want to draft, if you want to create, you want to have a template to work from, we recognize that Form Finder only can do so much. And so what we wanted to do was create kind of an Amazon-like experience where people could search for work product, expertise in the same way you shop online. And that's through a filtered search. And that filtered search is built upon the way people think of finding this type of work. So the way we analyze it, we talked to a bunch of M&A private equity lawyers to understand how they thought. But one is, what did we do? Are we buying or selling? So our client role, what are we doing on this deal? Because if I'm selling a company, then I kind of want that more aggressive, seller-oriented, we're only limiting it to these provisions, we're not saying any more than we have to. I kind of want to look at that corpus of data. So are we buying or selling? The second is the agreement type. Remember your agreement, asset purchase agreement, stock purchase agreement, securities purchase agreement. Those are all very different based on the structure of the deal. And so getting an understanding of what the agreement types were and properly classifying those. The industry. If you're Elon Musk and you bought Twitter, that is a very different agreement than buying the aviation division of General Electric. And so industries are very important dynamic. And in this organization, we are the number one rated healthcare firm in the world. And so about 50 to 60% of all of our deals are healthcare. And so that was almost too broad in industry. So we broke that down into all the various sectors for our health, ambulatory surgery centers, health and hospital systems, dental practices, ophthalmology practices. And we profile all of those deals with that information. And then finally, the dollar value. A $50 million deal is different than a $400 million deal. And so what you're able to do through this platform is to build out an experience that aligns with what you're doing. So if I'm a buyer on an asset purchase agreement for $50 million for a dental company, I click 3 or 4 filters and I get the 2, 5, 10, 15 agreement that we've done. And it's not just a link to the agreement itself, but it's a 360-degree view of the matter. So not only do you see the purchase agreement that you're trying to access, but you can see all the timekeepers that were involved with it. So that if you're trying to staff a deal and you're like, who's a fifth-year lawyer who's ever done a dental deal? You have that. If you're trying to price a deal, pricing is a disaster at so many organizations, but you're trying to price a deal, like what are the fees on this type of work? We have that information available. And so what we wanted to do was to say, a use case for data could be any number of things. It could be to staff a deal, to find the resident ERISA expert, to price it. And if we built out a profile of our transactions, that you could find the agreement, find the expert, find clauses, find pricing information, and we wanted to build that experience, and that's what our M&A Deal Hub is.
So, okay, you'd mentioned some of the different dimensions upon which you can search, filter, refine. How does that metadata get attributed? Is that a manual process? Are you deriving it through machine learning? Like how does that happen?
I would love for machine learning to be the answer to this question. But as of November 2023, we used AI to facilitate this work. So we licensed a platform called eBrevia and Cura. They are technology that law firms use in diligence, and that's the use case that this organization licensed eBrevia for, was to speed up our diligence process. But eBrevia's models are trained to get at a bunch of different data points. They're trained to get at the agreement name. They're trained to get at the date. They're trained to get at the parties in a notice block. They're trained to get at a purchase price. And so what we did is we have a whole process that we go through. So again, we have our form finder platform. So all that data sits in relativity. The first thing that we do is we filter down to a data set, and that data set is final executed agreements. There's no button that you could push in iManage that allows you, like, this, show me the final one. That doesn't exist. And so what we did is we worked backwards and we said, okay, let's look for PDFs, and let's look for PDFs that are filed in an executed documents folder, a closing documents folder, a closing Bible folder. And we work backwards from the metadata on iManage to curate a data set. And then from that data set, we have a whole workflow. So we look at the purchase price first, because we don't really profile anything under $1 million. So we look at the purchase price, and then we have a workflow. We profile the industry with some paralegals. We have a team that goes back and forth depending on the scope of it, but to use eBrevia to extract that agreement name, extract the date, extract the purchase price, extract the notice block, and then there's some cleanup. Somebody has to actually review that notice block and say, oh, I see in this deal, I see McDermott's name. I see Hunter Jackson was in McDermott. He's the partner. And then I see it says that McDermott represented Blackstone, which is the seller. And so they're taking that notice block, it's about 6 or 7 data points, sort of pulling those out and then mapping those into some very structured data cells. And so there is AI that facilitates that review, but there is a human being who has to go in and fill in some blanks. Look, the data points we're getting at are not particularly difficult. So it's not like we have to have a 5th or 6-year lawyer do this. But we've spent the past year coming up with workflows and coming up with the technology to allow us to efficiently capture this, to curate a data set, and to build a platform that now has 3 years and 2 quarters worth of information. So I don't know, about 1,600 matters that we have there. And then we update it on a quarterly basis so that the information is always fresh.
And how big of a team do you have kind of doing that manual curation? So it sounds like eBrevity, they're teeing you up, but a person still, a lawyer, still has to take a look and kind of give the final. Like, how big of a lift is that?
My answer is my team is never. It's not big enough. So I have 2 managers report up to me, and we have two KM lawyers. But what we've actually done, if I'm being honest with you, is we've been thoughtful about the process and thoughtful about who needs to do what and what their skill set is. So a purchase price is something that you kind of need to have some background in deal work to understand it, because a lot of times it won't be as straightforward as I'm selling my company to Infodash for $50 million. That's easy. Sometimes I'm selling it for $30 million in cash, $20 million in preferred equity, $7 million. And so it's there, you have to add it up. What's actually a part of the price and what gets deducted. And in order to determine that, you kind of need some experience. So for that data point, you should need like about a 5th-year lawyer to interpret that data point. But parties to an agreement, I can actually get a secretary or a secretary type level to do that. Agreement name, I can get a secretary. Date, I can get that. Industry, we've had to have paralegals do that. And so part of our learning curve has been who needs to touch what data point in order for us to efficiently get it. And so we've really, I think, affected that process over the past year and created something that I think can scale to other groups. But it is a lift. I mean, it took us probably 6 to 9 months to initially profile the 3,000, or excuse me, the 1,500 agreements that we have there, because as I said, it's curating the data set, figuring out who needs to profile what, figuring out a workflow that made sense. And so I think we've got a really well-oiled machine now, such that my 2 team members are not spending their day-to-day on this. It's just sort of keeping the machinery going. We work with an alternative legal services provider to actually do some of this work. We have our document processing team do some of the, not particularly difficult elements of it. So depending on the data point, we have different people doing it and the different skill sets to keep that machinery.
And are you required to report out an ROI calculation on this to either grow or maintain, the current resources you have allocated, or is it just so obvious that the ROI is positive that they tell you to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that knowledge management is, to some degree, a coalition of the willing. I stole that line from a previous supervisor of mine, who I was reminded she stole it from Donald Rumsfeld, and so see the sword better. But what I have found is that when we build these platforms, the conversation is never whether it's good enough. The conversation is always from somebody else. It's like, wait a minute, hey, I heard that y'all built a pricing dashboard for our corporate lawyers. Why don't we have that? Well, because you know. And we've never had a conversation. And so what we found is, as we deploy platforms, the groups that engage with them are so happy, and word gets out, and they're the emissaries for meeting their traditional head, which is certainly what's happened over the life cycle of me being here, and what's happening as we go into next year is people we've delivered on saying, this is amazing. I never had this before. Other groups hearing about it and wanting the same. One of the things we have done, though, is recognize that even if you build all these great platforms, there's a little bit of a perpetual marketing campaign that's required. Well, what we have tried to do, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier in terms of how we've experimented with it, is proactively pushing data and information to our lawyers. And so when we built our M&A private equity deal, we showed it at a group meeting. We told people where to find it. But what we also recognize is, generally speaking, you build these platforms, and the best adoption that you have is in the first 24 to 48 hours after launch. And we knew that. And so rather than always be telling people about, hey, remember we have this site, what we have done for our Deal Hub is to have an alert that for all new matters that can open. And we have a workflow where our KM counsel for our M&A private equity group looks at those new matters and says, oh, I see Ted has opened up a new matter for Blackstone. It said, they go to the document management system, pull a letter on Ted. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to read this. Oh, Blackstone is buying an ophthalmology clinic in Florida. They're doing a stock purchase agreement. And so what our knowledge management team does is on a daily basis, depending on how many new matters there are, pushes data to the deal team. It says, hey, I see you just opened up this new Blackstone matter for this type of acquisition. Here are the 3, 5, 6 similar deals that we've done before that align with that. Sometimes it's based on the industry. Sometimes it's based on the counterparty. But what we do is proactively monitor new matters and push data to people, because the field of dreams concept of if you build it, they will come. I always remind people that was a fictitious movie about ghosts that came out of a cornfield to play baseball. So it's not exactly the gold standard of a deployment strategy. And so rather than have that, I try to meet people where they are. Understand that I have a sense of what their needs are based off of a new matter report, and to proactively push anything that we've built to them with that in mind.
Well, yeah, you're not alone. So the skills.law survey that Ron Friedman and O's and they do every year. I just happened to be looking at it this morning, and the number, actually it's tied for number one on things that respondents worked on in 2022, process improvement at 55%, and selling KM and innovation internally, also 55%. And for 2023, what do you plan to work on? It came in at number 3 at 53%. Yeah. So it is KM, just like marketing, just like many areas of a business, it's really hard to, associate $1 spent with $1 in return. It's just difficult to do. Even this podcast, for example, this is a passion of mine. I do this because I love it and I geek out on this kind of stuff. My wife thinks it's really weird that I do, but if I had to calculate an ROI on the time spent, it would be tough to do. But I get to have intelligent conversations with people like you. I get to learn. We're getting exposure with the group of people who we typically engage with at law firms. There's a million, kind of soft benefits, and I think KM falls into that category too. So you're not alone. Well, we only have a few minutes left. I did want to talk about kind of some of the Gen AI stuff. So, that's really the hot topic of the day. AI has been around forever, but everybody, the general population thinks it's been around since last November when they first saw ChatGPT. And, I wanted to just get a pulse on what is McDermott doing on the Gen AI front. We talked about Copilot right before we went on the air. Give us a sense of what's going on there today and where you guys plan to go.
Sure. So, the way you and I met was, and I talked about pilot that we had earlier this year. So I guess probably a year ago, ChatGPT comes out. It's dominating the headlines for 2, 3, 4, 5 months. Every article, New York Times article, podcast, everything was, I got it to do this, or I got it to write a dispute letter to my landlord, or something. So all these different use cases, and it really, I think, more than anything I've seen in a long time, just sort of dominated the cultural zeitgeist. So my CIO and I went to our partner retreat in February of this year, and everybody was talking about this and asking questions like, if I can get, if ChatGPT can summarize the Civil War in the style of a Taylor Swift song, could it write a credit agreement in my style? I'm like, probably not. It's going to be with the very aspirational quests and thought processes of people, I would say at the beginning of 23. So what me and my CIO did is, a lot of buzz around this. Let's see if we kick the tires on this, not just understand, what it could do, what could it do with our own data. And so we did work on a project earlier this year where we licensed some of the existing LLM models. We had our data on a private server, and we experimented with that. So all of the conversation that we've had in this podcast has been data that me and my team had worked, that we knew the answers to the test. So if I had 1,000 purchase agreements that we profiled, I knew the ones we were seller, I knew we were buyer, I knew what the dollar value was, I knew what the agreement name was. And so our thought process is, could generative AI replicate this? Can it get the same answers that we do with the same level of accuracy? Because I knew how long it took us to profile, 13, 14, 1,500 mags. I knew what that process. If generative AI could do it or speed it up or do it at scale, then all of a sudden I'm not just building out a program for our M&A lawyers. I'm building it out for funds, credit, for our bankruptcy people. I'm building out a care program on steroid. That was the hope when we licensed the GPT models earlier this year. So we licensed those, had them on a private server, and worked with a vendor for a few months, and it did not go where we wanted it to go. It did some things really well. It could get to the name of an agreement really well. It could get to a date really well. But some of the relational values, it could not do. So as I said earlier, in a notice block, it will say, Blackstone is a seller. McDermott represents Blackstone. The buyer is TPG. TPG is represented by Stidley. So you have a cast of characters. You have a relationship value between what law firm did what. And we could not move the needle on that substantially. It would get it a name, but it couldn't. It couldn't interpret the relationship, no matter how much programming we did or fine-tuning we did with the vendor. It just never cracked north 30% accuracy on that. And so we put the TiVo on pause relative to that project and really said, the likelihood that me and my CIO are going to be Robert Oppenheimer is probably pretty freaking small. We're not going to build the bomb. And nor are we going to be able to figure out the right little startup company that's going to help us crack the code. What's more likely is that Microsoft is going to make the investment in this technology. Thomson Reuters is going to make the investment in this technology. Lexus is going to make the investment. Fastcase, vendors like that. And so what is the vendor landscape? What are they doing? And rather than us try and crack the code and find that right startup, let's go with some established vendors, their platforms, and really kick the tires on them. And so that's really where we've landed. In our, as I was saying, prior to this, just got access to Copilot. We're starting to scope out projects for that. And we're also trying to figure out, from our third-party vendor standpoint, what are the research platforms where this is moving the needle also. And so that is very fertile ground as we speak, and we're still very much in the process of trying to scope all of that out.
Yeah, I think it's still early. I mean, literally, we as partners who got kind of preview access, it was just before KM&I. I mean, it's been 6 weeks. So, even as partners who are supposed to get more lead time because we like to build solutions with these technologies, which helps Microsoft sell them, it is all so new. But, just conceptually, there are a few things that as a legal collaboration platform, otherwise known as intranet, extranet, there are some obvious ways in which we think we can leverage technology like that. The KM&I conference, I had a presentation and talked through a few of those. Like, we at Infodash, we really try and democratize the knowledge economy at law firms, which is a little different. Law firms typically have had very tight controls on who can push information firm-wide out on an intranet, but we have several really big firms, some of the biggest, who are starting to take a different angle on that and allowing people to post and making it a little bit more social. And what a great way to start a post. Say something like, hey, Infodash, start a post on the labor and employment page that discusses the Supreme Court decision on PPP this week. Or, so really interesting use cases on the Gen AI front. And then also just kind of some of the natural language stuff that, search operators today kind of dominate the enterprise search realm, right? And lawyers are not good at that.
Right.
That's not how they think. And they're very good with language and words. And so creating some sort of a natural language interface that allows people to access the resources that they're looking for, there's going to be tremendous opportunity. And it's like all the pieces are there. We just got to stitch them together. So it's still early on, but we're working hard on that now. And I think by mid 2024, there's going to be just some things are going to grow by leaps and bounds in terms of capabilities. So we're super excited about it. We're super excited to see what you guys are going to do as well. I spoke to, I had another episode I recorded this morning with some folks that are using Teams in a very advanced way. And Teams is a similar scenario to AI. Everybody's talking about it. Nobody's really doing it, except for the basics like chat, presence, online meetings. So, I would group you in that same category, McDermott, people who are doing real things with it. So I appreciate you spending some time with us here today and talking about that.
I mean, listen, it's very exciting. I was saying earlier, I know what I did as a knowledge management lawyer in 2012. And I know how I did it. And it was very manual, and it was very tedious. And in retrospect, I don't know how much it moved the needle. But I recognized in 2012, like if this is all I do, I'm going to be out of a job in 3, 4, 5, 6. Because the technology will get to the point of this level of tagging and identification and so forth. And within 5 or 6 years, Cura was really doing some of that. And so I've recognized that as the technology has improved, my skill set has to improve, but then also being creative about, okay, as the technology improves, what are the use cases for relativity, for eBrevia? And Gen AI is that on steroids. And, I know there have been many conversations around kind of the sort of the day-to-day practice of law. What are all of the various obligations I've said in an email? Summarize those for me. What did I miss in this Teams meeting? Absolutely will be transformative in terms of how people navigate their day-to-day. But beyond that, the things that I'm most interested in are it's summarization capabilities. And again, we haven't really kicked the tires on this, but here's version 1, here's version 2. What are the 20 biggest issues between these two different versions? And by the way, here are the issues from a prior deal that talks about how to structure it. Those are the kind of things we want to kick the tires on, because if it moves the needle on that, somebody told me when I was just at law school, the scariest thing in the world is a lawyer sitting down with a blank sheet of paper. And unfortunately, a lot of things that we still do, we're still starting with a blank sheet of paper. Blank sheet of paper for the email, blank sheet of paper for the PowerPoint, blank sheet of paper for the issues list, because this is subject. If it moves the needle on that, if it just helps create a first draft, then I'm not starting with a blank sheet of paper. And I'm kind of writing with red ink as opposed to black. It's just a very different way people work. So I think that the technology, to some degree, has caught up with some of our ambition. And I think just from a knowledge management standpoint and from being able to truly unlock the data that exists in an organization like mine, this is going to be an incredibly powerful set of technology and really something I think will be exciting for all law firms and organizations over the next few years.
Yeah, and if it can possibly help the issue of over-engineering, I mean, we're a small company and we have a almost 70-page operating agreement. It's complete overkill. And, anybody who we bring in, like board members or employees that have some sort of profits interest, are bound by this operating agreement that they have 70 pages. So I think that's another area of opportunity. But yeah, let's keep in touch. I'd love to check in with you guys maybe later in the spring after you have some runway behind you with Copilot, and we will too. And maybe we can compare notes and see what sort of value we were able to derive from it.
I would love that. I think that there's 1,000 flowers that are going to be blooming on this, and I think we're all going to have different. Oh, it really does this well, and it really doesn't do this well. We're going to all have different notes on that over the next 6 months or so.
100%. Well, I appreciate you joining me. It was great talking to you.
You too. Thanks so much, Ted.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfodash.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfodash to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Infodash.